an electricity tariff hike in the middle of a pandemic is what Nigerians have to deal with as the new service reflective regime takes off. The residential customers who get about 12 hours of electricity supply may have to pay as much as 70% more for power. George Etomi, director of the Eko Electricity Distribution Company, joins us for more on this. George, thank you for taking the time out to join us. I'd like you to bring us up to speed on how the new tariff implementation process is going at the moment at Eko Disco.
Well, as you said, the implementation started September 1st. And what we've done is we've adjusted all the meters to accommodate the various bands. And as you're aware, this is a service reflective tariff structure. And in EcoDisco, we have 5 bands that we cover. Bands A, B, and C. Band A is the highest, and we're supposed to give them a guarantee of a minimum of 20 hours of supply against their tariff. And then band B will be a minimum of 16 hours, and band C a minimum of 12 hours. At the moment, bands D and E tariff are frozen. So this is the way it's going to apply. It started, and in some cases, the increase is as high as 100%.
Now, the NERC did advise or urge discos to have consultations with their customer and is expecting that with this new service-based system, it would translate into longer hours of power supply and just general better service for customers. Is this something that EcoDisco has done or is doing?
Yeah, it's something we have done and will continue to do. I'm sure you can bear with me, you can agree with me that power supply has improved in the last few weeks. And that's because in anticipation of this increase, we started making the investments. As we've always told you, the argument has been that it is the poor tariff structure that has deterred investments. With the right tariff structure, the investments will come in. And many of us now will begin to put all the investments into ensuring that we take away all the bottlenecks in our various franchise areas so that we can deliver on our promises. Now, because this is a contract-based market, consumers who do not get what they have contracted to get are entitled to some sort of reprieve. On our own part, our efficiency too, apart from being dependent on us, is also dependent on other members of the value chain, like TCN, who has to wheel the power to us, the GENCOs who have to generate, and the gas suppliers who have to supply gas to us. Now, if any of the faults for inability to meet this contract outside of the DISCO inefficiency is ascribable to any other member of the value chain, then we have service levels agreements with them, and we can have recourse to them to recover any losses that will be occasioned us. So in other words, we're moving to a contract-based market. That is exciting. It's a pity that it has to happen in the middle of a pandemic. But then the truth is that if you balance the balance of things, the longer you delay, the less likely you have to get this market out of the quagmire in which it finds itself. A bit of a dilemma, but we need to move from where we are today.
Now, key to the success of this new regime will be that, well, maybe not all, but at least a significant number of customers will be metered. We know that that is still ongoing, but could you just bring us up to speed in terms of to what extent, and how much mileage you've been able to achieve in terms of metering your customers?
Yes. The distribution companies made that point very clear to the government, because from the standpoint of many consumers, if you don't meter me, we will have this endless disagreement over estimated bills. So part of this plan is going to include a massive meter rollout, and funds will be provided, a mixture of funds from the central bank, and the World Bank, with the meter asset providers who have already been decided. And by the way, some meters have already landed our shores, except that they were caught in some custom duty difficulties, which have now been taken away by the federal government agreeing not to waive tariffs on imported meters for at least another year. Hopefully, within this period, the metering gap will be filled by a combination of locally manufactured meters and imported meters to fill the gap, and then the rollout will begin. Now, in terms of when we think everybody should be metered, I still think we're about 18 to 24 months away, but at least things will start. In the interim, the regulator is putting a cap on estimated bills so that we don't have these crazy billing situations. We're still fine-tuning that, but to protect those who will still remain unmetered for some time, there are discussions about how the bills they get would generally reflect the consumption they make.
Now, as you mentioned earlier, cost-reflective tariff, or the absence of it, was one of the major factors holding the growth and more investments in this sector. Now that that has happened, the narrative obviously has changed. And obviously, everyone is expecting significant investments to be made, especially on the part of the discos. For you, for Eko Disco, what kind of significant changes should we expect in terms of how much you invest in infrastructure and just how that could shape your operations going forward?
Now, there are going to be a number of things that will happen to not just Eko Disco, but to most of the discos. First of all, there are discussions going on with the regulator. There are legacy issues. During the non-cost reflective regime, as you're aware, the discos have always complained that most of the bucket shortfalls have been put in their books, and that has made them, as it were, unbankable. The regulator has agreed in principle that the books of the discos will be cleaned out. Once the books of the discos are cleaned out, it means they become instantly bankable and you can go out and borrow or get investors to come in and create the liquidity that's required for continuous investment in the sector. Don't also forget that there is the Siemens initiative on the part of the federal government and the World Bank, who are going to also provide funding for the sector, which will be sent through the federal government to the discos and TCN, as the case may be. We will have those. And ultimately, the desire is that once the discos become truly robust financially, we can then look at the possibility of them going public so that the wider public can also invest in the business. That way, we all take ownership of the business and then create the sort of liquidity that enables a business that requires continuous investment, like an electricity business, to function properly.
The timing of this tariff increase, it's been said that it's not exactly ideal because obviously because of the pandemic, and now Labour is kicking against it. Are you concerned that threats from Labour could topple the plan on ground?
Well, the appeal must always go out to Labour. I don't think they should stand in the way. I know some of their concerns are genuine. In the midst of a pandemic, people's incomes have been compromised. It may just be difficult for everybody to keep up with the new tariff regime. But then, as I mentioned to you, most of the people that Labour will be concerned about are in the bands D and E. That is what you might call, that's the large number of consumers, the masses. There is a tariff freeze for them. They are not affected by the tariff increase. And they're also protected by the cap on estimated billing that's been rolled out by the regulators. So Labour should not be too overly worried about how it will affect the masses. Now, the bands A, B, and C are consumers who anyway, before now, have always clamored for more power and they don't mind paying if they see it. So once we do the investment and they get their power and they can genuinely retire their generators and all the other things, they will on an average find out they're actually spending less on their entire power profile than they were doing before now. And it is the income from them that will be used to cross-subsidize the the more vulnerable in the society. But what we need to do is just give this entire thing a chance so that we can actually move away from this stagnant position we found ourselves since privatization and begin to advance to that point where electricity, which holds the key to the diversification of this economy, will truly function, bail out the MSMEs, bail out all other artisans, get manufacturers steady power. Most of them will tell you that they spend over 40% of their OPEX on alternative power through burning huge generators and other kinds of power sources. So in the long run, there will be teething problems in the beginning. There's no doubt about them. But in the long run, it will always be a trajectory towards an open economy that will hopefully engender a beehive of activities so that the reprieve which we need, especially post-COVID, comes from the fact that people can now plan around steady electricity. Anytime you speak to people, everyone tells you a condition for business thriving is steady electricity. The journey has just started, and I think we should give it a chance for it to work.